Fasilena kilaboko komrayo Rabaraba Hauyegele Murabaraba Hauyegele Rabaraba Hauyegele Kirili Hutalena kilamali mamulayo Rabaraba Hauyegele Murabaraba Hauyegele.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the people of South Africa, Africa, and the diaspora. And thanks very much for tuning in to yet another episode of the EFF podcast. My name is Titus Tungu, and we're coming to you from Winnie Madikizela Mandela House here in Johannesburg. And today I'm quite excited to be joined by an EFF member, a ground force of note, fighter Carl Niehaus Mpangazita. Thank you very much for coming through, Comrade Mpangazita.
Thank you, Titus, and thanks for having me again. And it's great to be here in our revolutionary house.
Once again. Perhaps let's begin by looking at the resolutions of the EFF and PA, particularly regarding the Pan-Africanism and internationalism resolutions.
Well, as you know, those resolutions are an affirmation of what the long-standing policy positions of the economic freedom fighters have always been. And those resolutions reflect the fact that we are a Pan-Africanist organization, that we want to see this beautiful, beloved continent of ours to be united, that we want to bring an end to the artificial colonial borders that have been imposed on us, and we want to use the resources of Africa for the people of Africa. One of the saddest things that we had to confront, I think, in the full time of the EFF's existence has been the continuation of the exploitation and the division of Africa by big multinational companies with only one intention, and that is to extract the great mineral wealth, the resources of Africa, to exploit it for their own purposes, and never to empower the people of Africa. So if you look at all those resolutions, and I don't think the purpose of our discussion about those resolutions this morning is to go into the detail of them. We're talking about the overall intention. And the overall intention is, let's unite Africa. Let's never allow ourselves to be divided. Let's never allow anyone to plant the seed of xenophobia. And let us make sure that here, in the southern point of Africa, we stand as a guiding light against xenophobia, against artificial borders, and our Commander-in-Chief speaks so eloquently about the ridiculousness of the borders that we have, because they don't exist. They only exist in some people's minds. You can walk across those borders as you wish.
Yeah, anytime.
They seem to exist only for people like Gayton Mackenzie to go and stand somewhere outside Musina and make a scene and pose and perform. But the fact of the matter is, these borders are artificial. They do not contain anyone, and they do not help us to understand who we as Africans are. Now, of course, at the same time, the EFF doesn't say that we shouldn't deal with issues around economic development in the whole of Africa. We not simply say, let everyone come to South Africa. That's never been the policy position of the EFF. We've always been clear that we need to have some process and program of regulation, but not on the basis of what the West tells us, not on the basis of what this new incumbent in the White House would like to tell us, Donald Trump, but on the basis of what our African interests are, and of course what also the needs and interests of us as South Africans within Africa is. And you see, for me, that is that last part, that qualifying part of the last sentence I shared. South Africans within Africa is absolutely critical. So yes, I mean, obviously we want to see justice in Africa. We want to make sure that the wars in Africa must come to an end. We want to be part of the process of silencing the guns. We agree with the AU position on silencing of the guns. But we are very careful to allow that program of the African Union to be abused. We don't want to see that. Because what we see, and now I come to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is that an AU program on silencing of the guns then gets turned into a SADC intervention deployment in the DRC. And very few of the SADC countries actually participate in that deployment. But that deployment in itself then gets misdirected because it no longer becomes a peacekeeping mission. Go and read the statements of the SADC on the deployment of those troops in the DRC. It becomes a deployment which is offensive. It says these troops are deployed in order to protect the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the government of the president of the Congo. That is the statement. Now, as soon as you do that, you intervene in a situation and become an interested party. You become part of the division. You don't become part of the solution for unity. But worse than that.
Yeah.
The worst part of it, Titus, is you then become an agent for the protection of the interests of big multinational companies in the DRC, who themselves, again, have interests and control the government of the DRC. So those multinational companies don't have the interests of the people of the DRC in mind. You can be sure of that. All they want to do is to extract the very important minerals, the rare earth minerals that are there in the DRC, and in some instances, the DRC, especially in Eastern DRC, is the only country where those minerals can be found. So it is an attempt to extract those minerals at all and every cost, at the cheapest possible rate, and at the super exploitation of the people of the DRC and the workers in the DRC. And then you, of course, have the black comprador capitalists who get onto the same bus. And unfortunately, we've got quite a few of them here in South Africa. We've got the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's got mining and business interests in the DRC. We've got his family, Patrice Motsepe. We've got other family members who are involved there, Bridget Radebe, Jeff Radebe, who ironically then also is appointed by the president as the special envoy to the same area, using politics in order to advance business. And our troops then get sent into this hornet's nest, a hornet's nest that puts them in a position where they are not able to act in any possible neutral way as peacekeepers, because their mission, the description of their mission, means they must go there as soldiers to fight on one side in an offensive deployment.
Yeah.
And they are there to protect these mining interests. So you see what's happening is the South African National Defence Force, with our resources limited as those resources are, is then deployed as glorified security companies. And our soldiers are used as security officers to go and protect the mining interests of these comprador capitalists who in themselves again are acting on behalf of the big multinational, mostly white companies in the world who need these minerals to build their computers and build their smartphones and also build the batteries that they need for the electric car and industry.
Yeah.
But, and I must make this point, let's not confuse that as if we can say that Paul Kagame and what is happening in Rwanda is any better. Because there are no angels here. We've only got people on both sides who are being exploited for the same purpose. And ultimately that purpose is to exploit the mineral wealth of our African continent and to destroy our people. As President Julius Malema, when referring to these issues, said, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in fact, the whole Great Lakes area, has been destroyed over not just decades, over centuries by colonists. And those colonists have been out to create an extraction process of super exploitation. And the only way they could do so was divide and rule. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now again. I listened to a speech, a very seminal, significant speech that the late president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, shared with us. And he said, you know, I have followed what is going on in Rwanda and Burundi. And the way in which the Germans and the Belgians have been playing off the people of Rwanda and Burundi, the Hutsis and the Tutsis, against each other. How they deliberately destroyed the traditional leadership structures, the kingdoms in those countries, and the way in which they were directly involved in stoking on war, also stoking on the genocide that we've seen, that played out in Rwanda. Now, these are the things that we need to consider. And these are the issues that the resolutions of our National People's Assembly that were taken there and that were also discussed again in the way in which we're going to implement and carry them out in the plenum that we attended last week in Bella Bella. These are the issues that we need to consider and take fully on board in the work that we have to do as a Pan-Africanist organization, as the EFF, here on the African continent.
Yeah, and this sounds to be a very sophisticated process, because it seems South Africa is serving the agenda of the imperialist, as you have outlined that there are forces that are interested in the minerals in the Eastern DRC. But when you listen to the Ministry of Defense, you listen to the Minister Enjimutsecha, you listen to the Chief of SANDF, General Rudzani, they paint a picture of South Africa, SANDF, as a force that is playing a peacekeeping mission, which is as a result of a resolution from the SADC Troika Summit. Would you then consider this as a smokescreen? In fact, have they disclosed the rightful information that the public really deserves to know, or they are, in fact, playing with our minds?
Yeah. You see, I presume that many of our viewers will have watched the debate that took place this week in the joint sitting of the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans and the Standing Committee on Defense. In that debate, the EFF played a brilliant role. In fact, it was the
Absolutely.
only political party
Calling a spade a
present
spade.
in that debate that held the SANDF and also held the government through its main representative there, the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Angie Motshekga, accountable. And one of the things that we raised, in fact, I think in one of my inputs, I raised it very sharply, was that they are lying to the people of South Africa to say that this deployment of our SANDF troops in the Eastern DRC is a peacekeeping mission. It is not a peacekeeping mission. It is an offensive mission which is out there to defend the government of the DRC and to actually operate hand in glove, so to speak, with the armed troops of the DRC. Now, how do you expect when your mission is to attack, not to protect, not to keep peace? There is another peacekeeping mission that is now in the process of being withdrawn, and that is the UN peacekeeping mission of UNESCO. That is there. Very ineffective, unfortunately, very under-resourced. But the SANDF deployment as part of the SADC mission is not a peacekeeping mission. So there is lies and propaganda being told to the people of South Africa, and sadly even to our soldiers who are being deployed there and their families, that they are going there to keep peace. But you know very well that you're going there to wage war. And I asked the question yesterday, when you do that and you send your soldiers into that situation, do you expect that the other side, whether that other side are good guys or bad guys, and I've already identified my own views, I've already expressed my own views about M23 and also the role of Rwanda. It's not a positive role. It's a problematic role. But let's put that for a moment aside. If you are now coming with the troops of the DRC, and you are now fighting there on their side, and your mission says it is spelled out by SADC, you are there to protect and work with the government of the DRC against the rebels. You think those rebels are not going to shoot back? You don't empower your troops to go into such a conflictual war situation. You don't provide them with the necessary training, first and foremost. Secondly, you don't give them the correct weapons in order to be able to wage such a war, if that is now the intention to wage war. You give them even old, outdated weapons. Some of those weapons, I've seen them developed even during the Second World War era. The ammunition that you give them are not the correct ammunition to be used for those weapons. You've got no air coverage. You don't have unmanned drones that can help you to scan the situation, to be able to pinpoint your attacks. In fact, you don't even issue your soldiers with proper uniforms. Many of those soldiers have sent messages back that the uniforms that they received does not even include boots. They have to buy, and they've been told to buy their own boots. They complain that the tents that they are given in those military bases are inadequate. They're not proper for the climate in which they are. They are faced with the situation that the rations, the food that they get, is not adequate. In fact, the reality is you dump them there. You put them down. You don't even have a supply line that makes it possible to supply further provisions to those soldiers when they run out of proviant. You just leave them there. So you don't care. They must somehow make things happen. You don't share with the nation that you're actually going into a war situation. And then when the other side starts firing on you, because they are going to fire on you, because you are defined by your own mission statement that you are going to fight to them. That is what your mission statement says. Your mission statement doesn't say you're there to keep the peace. Your mission statement says you are there on an offensive mission. You are there to defend who they consider to be the enemy. So you're put in the middle of this mess. And you get put into that middle of that mess, and you get minced up literally in the middle of that mess of two opposing forces fighting for what? You think first and foremost they're fighting for peace. No, they're fighting for the minerals.
Yes.
Both sides are fighting to lay their hands on the minerals and those scarce resources and to make money from it. Go and look at one of the first statements that M23 issued after they took control of Goma and the surrounding areas. Rich in mining, rich in minerals.
Yeah.
The statement that the M23 issued was, if anyone is caught extracting minerals here and taking it away from this area, not through the channels that we utilize, they will be dealt with harshly. So the first thing they did was to secure the minerals.
Yeah.
So I'm coming back to the final conclusion of the reality of what we have there. Our troops have been carelessly and callously sent by Cyril Ramaphosa himself as the Commander-in-Chief of the South African National Defence Force, by Angie Motshekga as the Minister of Defence and of military veterans, and of course also her predecessors, because she only became minister during the last year. But a lot could have been done during the last year if she had her wits together, and she could have contributed to withdrawing our troops from this terrible situation. And then, of course, the commanding corps of the SANDF, all of them complicit in sending our troops to get involved in this defense of the extraction of the wealth of Central Africa, the wealth of Southern DRC, of the Lakes area, for the sake of the benefit of big multinational companies. And these are exactly the issues that our resolutions from our National People's Assembly address. It says it must come to an end. The resources of Africa must be used for the sake of the empowerment of the people of Africa. It cannot simply be a raw extraction of the minerals and the resources of the African continent. We need to get into a process of industrialization and beneficiation of our resources and our minerals here in Africa. And the only way that we will be able to do so is if we unite as Africans, because a united Africa becomes one of the most powerful economic and also in terms of population size blocks in the world. Once we unite, we will have the volume of resources and people to be able to give direction to what our needs are. Once we unite and we also create one currency, we will be able to compete most effectively also against the exploitation of the imperialists and the domination of the dollar. And of course, we support the de-dollarization of the world to get rid of the dollar as that instrument of trade and also instrument of exploitation in the world.
Wouldn't it be diplomatic enough for South Africa to, in fact, foster for peace between the two ethnic groups in DRC? Because we understand, if we can just provide a historical context into the conflict in the Eastern DRC, we understand that there are two groups, the Houthis and the Tutsi. Shouldn't South Africa be playing a mediation role, like ensuring that the sovereignty of DRC is intact and nobody goes into DRC for self-enrichment? In fact, the mineral resources of DRC are used to the benefit of the people of DRC. Because what I understand is that there is mining interest from various individuals and countries, because you listen to the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, although always evasive, he denies the fact that the DRC, or rather the Rwandan soldiers, have been sent to back up the M23 in Eastern DRC. But you hear the Minister of Defense here in South Africa saying, we had the Rwandan soldiers firing over our heads. Even the chief of SANDF confirmed that the killings of our soldiers, in fact, were as a result of an indirect attack from Rwandan soldiers. But you hear Paul Kagame denying that the involvement of Rwandan soldiers in DRC. So the question is, why should South Africa be caught in the crossfire of fighting a fight where two groups, in fact, are in conflict with each other, and we get our soldiers killed in this mission, so-called peacekeeping? Why should South Africa be found in this situation instead of playing a mediation role? I saw someone saying, why didn't South Africa send pastors if they were supposed to keep the mission, peacekeeping?
Look, Titus, you've just summarized actually part of what I've already said. By saying that we are caught in the middle of this very unsavory situation. And there's no need for us to beat around the bush when we call one side out for lies, and I've called the SANDF and the South African government and the Minister for Defense and military veterans out. You can also call the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, out, because it's a known fact that the Rwandan Defense Force is associated with M23. So let's not beat around the bush. Yeah. These are the realities. And yes, of course, South Africa should play a role for peace. And that's why it's important that South Africa participates in the very important meetings like the recent meeting of SADC that took place in Harare, where there was a commitment to peace. There was an underlining commitment, again, also to the Lusaka process to bring peace. There was an underlying commitment also to, again, empower the president of Angola to play that role of leading the peace process. All of those things we should support. But at the same time, let us not allow ourselves, while this process is going on, to actually become a party to one of the two sides in the conflict. Because that is where the SADC mission, with that particular task to defend the government of the DRC and defend the president of the DRC, puts us. So, in terms of our inability to fight, because we can't fight, we should withdraw. But also in terms of the role that we can play to bring peace, we should withdraw and play our role on the diplomatic playing field, so to speak. Then I believe we can say, now we are committing ourselves again to those principles that the South African government claims that it is dedicated to, on the international playing field. It says it wants to be seen as a government, as a nation that works for peace, that is not partisan, and a nation that wants to work for the sake of human rights to be always as the forefront of the ideal that we stand for. We cannot do that under these circumstances because we do not have our own house in order. If we wanted to go and be a fighting force in the DRC, not peacekeepers, then we should have had our troops properly resourced. We should have had the weapons to do that fight. We should have had the air cover. But we know we don't have the air cover. Our Gripens are not operational. Rooivalk is not operational. Yesterday, questions were asked about the Rooivalk of the chief of the South African National Defence Force. And go and look at his response. He's all over the place. He says, no, I can't tell you. You know, it's a security matter. We can't say how many. We don't have. It's very simple. We don't have the weapons with which the Gripens should be weaponized in order to be able to fight from the air. The Rooivalk is not operational. The few helicopters that we have are not attack helicopters. They are helicopters that are there to provide a backup. We are not ready to fight a war. When you're not ready to fight a war and you are pushed into operation theater of war, where it is even difficult to identify yourself with either of the two sides that are fighting, because ultimately both of them are actually proxies of various big capital interests with a purpose that is to extract the minerals of Africa from this African continent, which is exactly what we as a South African government should be against, and definitely what we as the economic freedom fighters is against. Then you've got no place to be there, and you must get out of there as quickly as possible. And for me, the main purpose of the hearing that we had yesterday, that joint sitting of the two defense committees in Parliament, was to hear from the SANDF and from the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans how they're going to evacuate our soldiers immediately. And that purpose was not met. On that basis, the meeting yesterday failed because they didn't come there to share any information with us about how they're going to withdraw our soldiers. In fact, they shared no information with us. The chief of the South African National Defence Force had a one-pager, which I don't even think covered one page. If it was 400 words, it was a lot, which he read out to us. It was an insult to our intelligence. It was an insult to the nation. It was an insult to the soldiers who are still fighting and suffering there, and who are now actually in a situation where they've been taken as, they're under the control of M23.
They're kept
You see, I'm hesitating whether they are actually now captives of M23, whether they are there, because not even the clarity were given to us exactly about what their status is. But the thing we are clear about is they are under the control of M23. And then, of course, we were told all kinds of funny fibs that when we saw the videos of our soldiers hoisting the white flag, it wasn't supposed to be a white flag. It was a marker to tell the Rwandan Defense Force not to fire at us, to fire over us. You know, fiction. Insulting again the intelligence of the MPs and of the whole nation. And you ask yourself, how on earth, but I must make this point. You ask yourself, how on earth did someone like that become the chief of the South African National Defence Force?
Questionable.
Questionable in terms of the truth, questionable in terms of ability, questionable just in terms of his own integrity. Because one story after the other are told to us, and then, of course, he tries to play on our emotions because he wants to talk about his boys, his soldiers. Mm-hmm. But if he cared truly so much about those soldiers, which he should have,
yeah,
because he is, after all, the chief of the South African National Defence Force,
yeah,
then he should never have sent them there under those conditions if he truly cared.
Yeah. Did the committee reveal how these soldiers, 14 of them, were killed and why? Did these soldiers, were they shot at or were they bombed in Goma? Were those details revealed or they remain sketchy? And all equally, how many of the M23 rebels were killed at the hands of SANDF?
Well, it's a matter of public record that all of that was obfuscated. So I think one can assume that there were soldiers killed because of firing that came from the opposing side, whether it was M23 and the Rwandan Defence Force or just M23. And it is critical that we need to find out, because our commander-in-chief, with his very sharp insight, is correct to say, if it is revealed that it was actually Rwandan Defence Force firing that led to the deaths of our soldiers, it must have consequences. Because here you have the defense force of another nation killing our troops. But not even that information was properly shared with us. So now we sit with a situation where we must say, perhaps
Connect the dots.
we can connect the dots, but ultimately what we should have received from the SANDF yesterday were clear answers. But what we got were obfuscation and lies. And the other part of the question that you asked, how many of the soldiers or the rebels of M23 were killed, nothing was said to us. We see speculation. We hear that a number of them were killed by our SANDF soldiers. We don't know, because there is no formal confirmation. Now, yesterday we did throw down the gauntlet to the SANDF because, you know, when people are lying, when they behave like this, they always use the excuse, we can't talk in public. Intelligence cannot be shared here. Our troops are still in a war operational situation there in the DRC. So we said, fine. We understand that we don't want to compromise our soldiers. We don't want intelligence reports to the point where we will have them compromised. So we're prepared to have a closed meeting. We're happy for you to come in a closed meeting where only the members of the committee are present. There's no cameras. There's no further news going out to the public, and you inform us. I didn't see great excitement from their side to come to such a meeting. So we will wait and see, but we will definitely push and shove for that meeting. And as you know, the economic freedom fighters, we are very good at making sure that these things happen. Because I can assure you that even the Joint Defence Force Committee meeting that happened yesterday, that one on Joint Standing Committee of Defence and Military Veterans and the Portfolio Committee on Defence, and those meetings did only take place because of the EFF.
Yeah, of course.
Last week, they were cancelled, postponed.
Yeah.
It was only because we made noise, because we also took it into the public domain and made sure that the public also started demanding that this joint meeting of the two defense committees in Parliament has to take place, that the meeting took place. And we will make sure that that closed meeting, where they cannot use the excuse of intelligence and sensitive information, will also take place.
Yeah.
But, sadly, I'm not holding my breath. Because what we are dealing with are people without integrity, also incompetent people, people who've proved themselves to be prepared to lie in order to save themselves. Because you must understand, this whole thing of what they say and what they do, they know they're in trouble. They know that they've messed up. They know that they've been told, not just since last year, but for many years,
so they are playing a cover-up game.
That they should not have sent our South African National Defence Force soldiers into that killing fields in the DRC. So now they are trying to cover themselves because they want to continue to live their lives of elitism and of luxury. You saw the callousness of the SANDF High Command last week.
Playing golf.
Yes, that's where we're going. That's what I wanted to talk about. Last week, just after it was announced that 14 of our soldiers were killed in the Eastern DRC, the head of the South African Air Force, together with the chief of the army and the chief of the navy, went to Copperleaf Estate, the Ernie Els golf course, and they played golf. They posed for photos smiling from ear to ear. And I can take you to some of those photos.
Yeah, I saw them.
You can see also some of the photos of the chief of the South African Air Force standing to a young lady. She hardly has clothes on. Enjoying themselves.
Even using the SANDF helicopter, I'm told.
And they were using 2 SANDF helicopters to come there. While our troops don't have any helicopter support in the DRC, they have helicopters to fly themselves for fun to the Copperleaf Estate to play golf. And when they then get caught out, cynically, after the event, they then say, no, the intention is for the proceeds of this golf day to go to the families of those soldiers that were killed. But after the fact, we were never told that this golf day, which was a standard, regular annual golf day, was meant in order to raise funds for the families of those soldiers who were killed. Afterwards, now they come with this lame story. Oh, we're going to use the intention of the golf day, is going to use the money to support the families, adding insult to injury.
To also show that there's
And this
no money.
morning, I talked to one of our local government leaders in Limpopo, who was in close contact with one of the families, the wife of one of the soldiers that had been killed. And he called me and said, you know, Fighter Carl, I'm in trouble. This poor wife of this soldier is now confronted with the situation that the whole community, out of sympathy and wanting to show their respect and condolences, are coming to the house every day. They are poor. They don't have money. They don't have food to share with the community who come there. And they also want to have their own self-respect that they're able to do so. So the wife phoned the SANDF and said, please, guys, can you please provide some resources that we can, in accordance with our traditions, respect my husband? My husband is not yet been, his body has not yet been brought back from the DRC. We don't know when his body is coming back. We're in deep mourning. The community is in mourning with us. Can you give us just some small financial help to manage, to navigate this situation? You know what answer they got? There's no money. So, yes, the golf day took place. the head of the South African Air Force Golf Day that was supposed to raise money. Did you hear my slip of the tongue? Raid money.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were actually doing. They were raiding money, not raising it. So that's what they promised. That money will be there for the families. Here's a clear example. A wife of one of the soldiers who passed on requested for assistance. She was given a hard, cold shoulder. There's no money.
Just for funeral arrangement.
Just for
Let
funeral
alone
arrangements,
deployment.
just to provide food to the family and to the community. So this is the reality that we're faced with. This is a callous, uncaring, self-serving South African National Defence Force with a leadership that don't care at all for the soldiers. And that's why they could so easily send those soldiers into that killing field without providing them with the necessary equipment and protection to save their lives.
I mean, the SANDF has dismally failed to protect or secure the so-called borders. You go to the Bait Bridge border post; it's porous every day. In and out.
I don't think the word porous is even the answer, because porous means, like, in biology, porous means there's still a membrane that something moves through.
Yeah.
There's still some kind of...
It's a free flow there.
There, it's open.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that there are SANDF soldiers who are directly involved in facilitating the move of people across the border through corruption. They get paid. Because they don't get paid proper salaries. You can see even the people from the SANDF, the soldiers who are working there, their uniforms are threadbare.
Yeah.
They are not taken care of. So it's easy for them to take 100 rand or a few 100 rands and just turn a blind eye.
And the point that I wanted to
And there
make
was a documentary recently, and I put that documentary out into the public domain, which showed how those soldiers are being bribed. Now, I'm against soldiers being bribed. And if they get caught, they must face the full disciplinary book of action against them. But then they went to the head of the army. That same documentary sat in his office in Pretoria and said, what's going on? He starts trying to justify what is happening. He starts trying to explain that the soldiers are doing this because of budget cuts. You've seen that.
I've seen it, yes.
Now, how on earth do you do that? Because if you are prepared to justify such corruption, it means that you are also corrupt. And it's the old maxim that the fish rots from the head. We saw the rotten head yesterday with the chief of the South African National Defence Force. We saw the rotten head of that chief of the army, the same one who now in the last week was at the Ernie Els golf course busy playing golf.
Yeah.
How can these people give leadership and transform the SANDF? Because the SANDF needs a full turnaround strategy. It is in the full throes of collapse right now. Corruption is rife. Go and look at the meeting that SCOPA had last week, where we had reports from the Special Investigation Unit, SIU, about the amounts of corruption that is going on in the SANDF. Not 1 million or 2 million, but hundreds of millions of rands that are just stolen. Go and look at the entities that the SANDF is supposed to be in control of, Armscor and Denel. During that same report, it was reported to us that the levels of corruption in Denel is on steroids. That there's this Project Hoefyster, that was meant to develop an armored vehicle, a new generation armored vehicle, that is supposed to take over from the old rattle, which has become antiquated and not in any state to really operate in operational areas. 8 billion. Are you still sitting on your chair, Titus? 8 billion rands
Must be falling by now.
had been paid over to Denel for that project. Not a single armored vehicle had rolled out of the manufacturing plant. Not one. And this is part of the problem why our troops are in the mess where they are in the DRC. If we had this new generation troop-carrying armored vehicle, we would have been better equipped to face the enemy fire and to be able to move in a way that makes it possible for us to face combat. But 8 billion rands is gone. Surely 8 billion rands means people must go to jail and they must go to jail for the rest of their lives. But no one can tell us where the money is. No one can show us the new vehicle that money was supposed to purchase. And no one has been held accountable. Now, on the 18th of February, SCOPA is having a follow-up meeting on all these findings of the Special Investigation Unit. And they've called the Minister of Defense to come to SCOPA to come and account. I will go there and attend as a member of the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans and the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, because I want her to account to that instrument of Parliament that oversees financial spending. What has happened? Because what we saw yesterday in terms of her unaccountability, what we see in terms of the disaster in the DRC, and the lives that have been lost. And by the way, Titus, today we must no longer talk about just 14 lives that have been lost. If we go over the period of the last year and this 1.5 months into the new year, we must talk about 24 SANDF soldiers that have passed on. Their lives, the loss of their lives, is a direct consequence of this corruption that I'm referring to. And the minister must account. So for her, she's not going to get off the hook. The chief of the South African National Defence Force will not get off the hook. And we in the Economic Freedom Fighters have a sacred duty, because we made an oath. I stood there in Parliament. I made an oath when I was sworn in as a member of Parliament. My oath said I must be there in service of the people of South Africa. That is my sacred duty. And that duty demands from me to keep the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans accountable. That duty demands from me to make sure that we find out how every cent in the SANDF has been spent, because the generals come to us always with this excuse. The budgets have been cut. Therefore, we can't deal with the maintenance of the various tools of war that we have, the frigates, the submarines, the armored vehicles, the Gripen jets, etc. We don't have money.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, yes, I know your budget had been cut. We are in an austerity environment. But that's only a small part of the story. Because if you use the money that you got, inadequate as it is, with leadership, with clear planning, you could have achieved a lot. In an environment where you say you don't have money, you allow 8 billion rands to disappear, then you can't tell me that I must have sympathy for you, but you don't have money.
Yeah.
And when we then say, as the Portfolio Committee on Defence and Military Veterans and the Joint Standing Committee on Defence, that we know we need more money. We want to actually be the champions for the South African National Defence Force to get the budget increased. We started talking to government and we said, truly, if we look at international standards, can we push up the amount of the budget that goes to defense to 1.25% of GDP? But we cannot, with a clear conscience, insist on that when we know that the money is going to be abused and misused. So as we increase the resource, as we start developing a plan on how to turn the SANDF around, we must also insist that this corrupt, callous, failed leadership must go, because they're not fit for purpose.
They must hang their
They
boots.
cannot do the job.
Yeah.
I said to them yesterday, take your jackets and go.
Yeah.
But I like the phrase you use better, because that's a military phrase. They must hang their boots and get out of the barracks.
Yeah. And
Indeed.
Okay. So, Comrade Carl, the point I wanted to make was, now that the EFF calls for the overhaul of the SANDF, I mean, it's not far-fetched. It's something that everyone can see, even the blind can see. The SANDF, it's not as effective as it should be. Clearly, also, their duties may not be as clear to them. They don't know what duties to perform at what time. Remember, during COVID, they killed civilians. These are the people that failed to secure the so-called borders. Now, you hear the SANDF chief arguing that these soldiers have gone through combat and mission training before jetting off to the Eastern DRC. Clearly, this is not the type of training that you believe will restore the SANDF to its former glory.
Not at all. It's evident that our soldiers are not properly trained, that they do not have the training and the ability to be able to carry out what was expected of them. And now we can make a distinction between the hardware, which they didn't have, and which is a very serious problem, and the training. Because both they don't have. So there's a serious problem in how we train our soldiers, in terms of their skills as soldiers, but also in terms of their life skills as human beings. Because one of the most disturbing reports from the United Nations peacekeeping mission throughout the world was that they said that our SANDF soldiers are the ones who have the highest incidence of abuse and sexual abuse of all the forces that are deployed in such missions. Now, that indicates to you that there's something also wrong in terms of the human skills and the way in which people are prepared to serve and present our nation. Imagine, South Africa is known in the UN peacekeeping report as our soldiers are the worst sex pests and sexual abusers of all the armies that are deployed under the UN banner. That's a tragedy, but it indicates a lack of training. It indicates a lack of care for the soldiers that we send and making sure that they will be fit and able as human beings, but also as soldiers to be able to do their job.
Yeah, and the situation in Goma, in the Eastern DRC, reminds me of where South Africa comes from. Think of the native people of South Africa, the Khoi and the San, whose land was dispossessed by the white settlers. Now, don't you think this situation is more identical because this is a more territorial conflict than anything? Because minerals belong to a certain area. I mean, I've had one of the ANC people say, I think, playing to the gallery saying that it means if Donald Trump cuts foreign aid, there's no mineral that is going to go out because Africa owns the minerals. But the point is, the Tutsis argue that they are being discriminated on their own land, where these white, imperialists have interest in their own land. Now, is that not a similar situation with South Africa, where black people were dispossessed of their land by white people, and now shouldn't South Africa be more cautious when it comes to the conflict in DRC because of our history, of where we come from?
Of course.
They should act, in fact, with restraint, because where we come from, this is the similar fight when we compare to South African struggle and the Tutsis and the Hutus struggle.
Of course, what you describe is not just the South African story. It's the story of Africa. It's the story of colonialism. And you're absolutely correct. And that is what I said at the beginning of this interview. That South Africa carelessly has thrown itself into an environment whereby the agreement of the SADC, it became involved in a war situation with an offensive mandate to fight on one side against another. And unfortunately, therefore, become a pawn in the hands of big multinational companies. Because those multinational companies love divide and rule. There's a very interesting cartoon. I wish we could show it on this show. It's the hands of these big white multinational companies pushing two soldiers shooting at each other. That's on top of the surface.
Yes.
Underneath are the minerals, the diamonds, the gold, the cobalt, all those riches of the DRC. The second two pairs of hands you see crawling under the earth, grabbing those minerals. So why do we allow ourselves, with this knowledge, with this historical understanding of our own struggle and our own land dispossession, why do we allow ourselves to become an agent on the one side, fighting against fellow Africans on the other side, both manipulated and pushed and financed by big financial interests of these multinational mining companies and big manufacturing companies? That, Titus, is the essence of this whole issue. Everything else is situational. It's in terms of the immediate circumstances of the operational area that we're in. But if we don't have that overview, if you don't have that understanding, which can only be provided to you by ideology, you will never understand what is playing itself out in the DRC. And that is, and we started by that in this interview when you asked me about the various resolutions of the National People's Assembly. And that is why the only political party, the only revolutionary movement who can understand what is happening in the DRC and in the whole African continent here in South Africa is the economic freedom fighters. Because we've got the political, ideological tools that help us to have that global view, that full understanding, and not just to get ourselves entangled in these battles and operational squabbles that goes on the ground, because they are simply a reflection of what the overall political and economic dynamics are. That's why your previous interview with Commissar Sam Matthys was so important, when he spoke about the structure and the superstructure and the ideology that informs one's understanding. And he made a brilliant input to our plenum in Bella Bella, where he gave us the historical background to the development of our founding documents and how those founding documents, and especially the 7 cardinal pillars, should play out in terms of every action that we are involved in. And of course, that also involves our international interventions, our international political perspective, and our understanding of us as a Pan-African organization.
And that affirms that there should be a dialectical relationship between the history and the future.
Of course.
Now,
and the future must mean that we are going to put an end to Africans being used by white monopoly multinational companies, Africans being divided, Africans killing each other, Africans not benefiting from the resources of the African continent. And that is where South Africa must put its effort. And it doesn't put its effort there under this regime. Why doesn't it put its effort under this so-called farcical government of national unity, which is the more recent manifestation of the problem? And even why didn't it put its efforts in there over the last 30 years of ANC government? Because the ANC had allowed itself to become a comprador agent of these big multinational companies. And the only political revolutionary movement that can extract us from that terrible trap is the economic freedom fighters. So it's only through us that we will be able to bring this liberation of the mind and eventually also the financial and geopolitical liberation that is required. And let me quickly refer to something else, because I've seen there's confusion about it. And this is about the latest decisions of Donald Trump. He's going to stop aid to South Africa. He wants to get out of AGOA. He's unhappy about this very lame land restitution bill that the government of national unity is trying to push through, which is not really a land restitution bill, but he even is opposed to that. Now, I see some people say, but fine, let Trump go, let us pull out of AGOA. I've got no problem for us to be out of AGOA. But the main issue is that Donald Trump feels himself entitled to come and dictate to us as South Africans how to deal with the restitution of land in this country. And on top of that, then, his financier, Elon Musk, comes and says he doesn't like black economic empowerment policies and it must go, otherwise he and all his money will leave South Africa. We are not saying that we want to be dependent on their money. In fact, it will be a good thing if we can totally entangle and disentangle ourselves from those resources, because they were always meant to create dependence and not independence. But the underlying attitude, the underlying idea that informs their actions of wanting to once again use those resources and those agreements like AGOA that Africa and also South Africa had entered into, now as leverage to blackmail us, that we must condemn. And I find it extraordinary. And it's again an indication of lack of ideology and how you can derail yourself when you don't have ideology. That a political party such as the MK Party could issue a media statement celebrating the victory of Donald Trump and his ascendancy to the presidency of the United States of America. Wow. How can you do something like that with exactly the situation I've sketched for you now, with the attitude that Trump and Elon Musk and the rest of his coterie has, which is one of interference, one of wanting to blackmail Africa and South Africa, and wanting to destroy the future for us for the sake of American self-interest, because that's all that Trump is about. You can only make statements like that. You can only issue media statements like that when you are deprived of ideology. And that again confirms to me the problem of the MK Party. But we're not here to talk about MK Party today.
Yeah.
But I think it just demonstrates the problem and why ideology is so important. And I think the whole purpose of this conversation on this podcast was to talk about why is the economic freedom fighters taking the kind of international and local policy positions that we do. And we do so because we have clarity of ideology. Because
Absolutely.
the day you allow the death of ideology, you will destroy yourself, as the ANC had done.
Yeah.
You will lose perspective. You will not be able to have the eagle's view of what is happening on the ground. You will simply be entangled into the details of internecine infighting, and you will be tossed around between all of those fights, and you won't understand the manipulation of big international monopoly capital in creating those divisive conflicts.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought the issue of Donald Trump into the fore, because his administration is wreaking havoc across nations, not only Africa. In fact, Donald Trump is ill-informed by white elites. You look at lobby groups like AfriForum, organizations like the DA, are the ones that are peddling misinformation about South Africa's land reform. Take Expropriation Act, for an example. Now, Donald Trump, ill-informed as he is, goes public saying South Africa is confiscating land from certain classes of people in South Africa, which is diabolical, which is baseless.
It's a total lie. It has no reality. There's no basis in fact.
Exactly. So, in fact, the irony is Donald Trump is the one who's confiscating land, because he has had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, and he has vowed to take the Gaza Strip, the land in Gaza Strip, which belongs to the Palestinians. So that is, in actual fact, a declaration of war.
Well,
of
Donald
conflict.
Trump, I just wanted to make this point. You know, in addition to what you've just said about what he has now vowed to do with regards to Gaza, he has decided to withdraw any negative sanction against the illegal settlers on Palestinian land throughout the whole of what is remaining of Palestine. That was one of his first executive actions that he took. So, exactly what you say. This man supports land grabs. He supports a colonial occupation of Palestine. He supports that manifestation of that colonial occupation through the illegal settlers that at least in the past were described and declared as illegal, and at least there were some sanctions against them. He's withdrawn them. But of course, the reality also is that whether it was going to be a Republican president or a Democratic president, it was never going to be good from the USA. Because the USA is an imperialist power. It is a power that wants to dominate, and it is a power that exploits. It would just have been a difference in perspective and degree. And that's why the media statement that we as the EFF issued after the elections was correct. To say, look, whether it was Democrats or Republicans, it would not have been good for us. But in this instance, Trump is the worst that we could possibly have gotten. And you're right to say he is causing havoc and destruction through nations throughout the world. And he's also causing havoc and destruction in the personal lives of people throughout the world. The way in which he is trying to dictate to people who they should be, what their gender preferences should be, to women about how they can use and be in control of their bodies, is absolutely disgusting. It is dictatorial. It is fascist. And it must be called out for what it is.
Yeah, I want to engage our viewers, Comrade Carl. There's a video that I want us to play. Okay. So please do watch this video and drop your comment on the comment section just to let us know what you think about some of Trump's decisions to cut foreign aid in African countries.
Yes, I support the lady. Trump should cut everything completely. He shouldn't even make it 90 whatever days. He should cut it completely. We don't need it. It rather goes to other individuals, but not us. Please, he should cut it completely.
All right. So, Comrade Carl, what do you make of this video? It's retweeted by Elon Musk. In fact, seemingly to be happy. It seems to be happy that some African people want the foreign aid to be cut, primarily because they believe they don't benefit from any foreign aid. It's only the elite pact that benefits. That also goes to what AfriForum believes. AfriForum says we are going to engage Donald Trump to ensure that this foreign aid does not extend to other people. In fact, it should be constrained, or it should be limited to politicians, because politicians are the ones that are at the top of the food chain. Your thoughts?
Well, of course, AfriForum is reactionary. AfriForum is racist. And AfriForum is trying to weaponize this reactionary actions of Trump to serve their own purposes. I'm also in favor of us getting out of the way in which AGOA and foreign aid controls us. But the point is not that at this stage. The point is the way in which Trump is announcing it, because he's not doing it in order to liberate the people of Africa or the people of the world. He's doing it to gain even more control and to destroy countries for the sake of his economic advancement as the United States of America. And that's why the commander-in-chief was right to say, we draw the line here. We will not be dictated to. What we are going to do about expropriation of land without compensation, we will not be dictated to about black economic empowerment in South Africa. We will continue to implement those policies because they are the right policies. You see, people get themselves misled because they don't have an ideological understanding of the reality of our country and of the world. And then they jump onto this issue of, let foreign aid go. But they don't contextualize how that process of foreign aid that we should entangle ourselves from must be dealt with. Because it can only be dealt with, Titus. And now I'm going to sound like a stuck record, but it is very important. It can only be dealt with if we gain control over our own resources, if we can develop our resources, if we can unite our African continent and we can become a strong economic power with one currency. Then, goodbye foreign aid. But you don't hear that, and that is not what Donald Trump wants. He wants an environment where the withdrawal of foreign aid will even weaken these countries further. He wants them to be even more in conflict. He wants the elites in those countries to fight each other. He wants the people in those countries to be in war with each other for the little small resources that are available after his imperialist nation has extracted the majority of our wealth. That is his intention.
Yeah.
Because ultimately he's got only one thing in mind, one track mind, Trump. He wants to empower and super exploit the rest of the world to empower the United States of America. That is what America first means in the mind of Donald Trump. And those who now say, yes, it's fine, let him take the aid, as long as they don't understand that context, they are putting themselves in an untenable position because they don't understand what needs to happen in order for us to be able to disentangle ourselves from this trap that foreign aid, and I include AGOA in it, has caught us in.
So pragmatically, Comrade Carl, what are you saying? Are you saying we should kneel down before Trump and allow him to continue to abuse us? What should happen now in the intervening period? Because now he's currently reviewing the foreign aid and already taken a decision to stop some of the funding. What should happen in the immediate and in the long run? You might have had Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe saying if he cuts foreign aid, it means there won't be minerals going to the US. But in your view, what should happen currently at this point in time?
We must start to understand our own strength. And that is why what Gwede Mantashe said was correct. I don't have a problem. We must use our resources. And those countries who are so dependent on our resources in order to negotiate for ourselves a liberation deal where we can be in control of our resources and we will not allow this kind of blackmail to take place. So Trump must face the consequences of his actions, but we will only be able to give him the consequences if we as African nations can unite, can work together, and use our resources in order to empower ourselves. So that is what South Africa must work for. That is what South Africa must work for in the DRC. Not sending our troops in there to go and fight on one side, but to work for a peace that will be empowering to the people of the DRC and to ourselves. It's the same thing that must happen in Sudan. It's the same thing that must happen throughout the African continent. Self-empowerment and an understanding of what our strengths are. We've got huge strengths, but we don't utilize them. And the time has come for us to utilize them. And I hope that out of what Trump now is doing, out of what is happening, something good can come if it leads us to that understanding. And for us as African nations to unite and not to allow ourselves to be divided further and to be exploited further.
Janus Walus, evidently, unequivocally unrepentant.
Yeah.
He goes to say, if given a chance, I would kill Chris Hani again. Clearly, this says something about our justice system.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts, please.
I'm disgusted. I watched that interview with Janus Walus. There's a huge problem with our parole system and our justice system. Walus was given a life sentence. But yet we were told by the judiciary and eventually by the Constitutional Court that Walus must be released because we have parole conditions that allow for such criminals, such as him, also those that have been given life sentences, to be released. But we didn't take into consideration the consequences of what he has done to our nation, because we were robbed probably of a future president, and a president that could have helped to steer our nation in a very different direction from where we ended up. Didn't take into consideration the immense suffering that has been inflicted on the Hani family, and the fact that the widow of Comrade Chris, Dimpo Hani, was clear that she did not want Walus to receive parole. Our parole conditions also states that it must show that a person has been rehabilitated, so that that period that the person has served in prison has actually impacted on his or her life and changed it. None of those things have been met. And yet, our legal system allowed Walus to be released on parole, and actually much more, to leave the country. Now, you must ask yourself, what is going on here? Because this is not just a legal issue, it's a political issue. I remain absolutely convinced that it was important for political figures in South Africa, also within the African National Congress, to get Walus out of South Africa as quickly as possible. And part of the condition of Wallace's release, I believe, was for him never to reveal the true circumstances of what led to the assassination of Commander Chris Hani. I don't believe for one moment that Walus and Clive Derby-Lewis acted on their own. There's a whole body of political, environmental evidence in terms of how problematic Comrade Chris and his principled stance against what was happening during the CODESA negotiations, as well as the popularity that he had and what he stood for in terms of fundamental economic change and liberation in South Africa, that he had to be removed. So I believe there were ANC politicians involved. I believe that they are protecting themselves by having manipulated the system in order to get Walus out of South Africa. And the question must be asked, who were benefiting? I can't, because Walus is not talking to the extent that one would like him to reveal what was going on, comment on it except to say very strange things happened. Even some of the issues that he himself referred to with regards to the visit of Jacob Zuma and also the involvement of Jacob Zuma in having the butcher of Vlakplaas not only released but also given a stipend of 40,000 rands a month. These are questions. The cock, yes. Mm-hmm. I like to just I don't want to humanize him by giving him a surname.
Yeah.
He's the butcher of Vlakplaas. So, why did these things happen? We don't get answers. But what is clear is that Wallace actually, in terms of his parole agreement, was not supposed to give interviews. So he's broken the parole agreement. He goes and arrogantly and full of himself say, if I was ever called on to do the same, I would have done, and I will do the same. He's an unrepentant killer, an unrepentant racist. And the long and the short of it is, we've released an unrepentant killer and racist, and we have robbed our nation from the ability to get closure on the death of Commander Chris Hani, because we have been robbed of getting the information about how Comrade Chris was truly killed and who was involved in his killing. But we must continue to probe despite all these obstacles that have been put in our way, because ultimately it is critically important that we must reveal why certain actions, why certain visits to prisons, why certain releases of people, why certain benefits to the butcher of Vlakplaas had been given. We need to get to the bottom of the story. And I personally and many other people will not rest until we finally know what really happened.
What should happen now? Are we supposed to go and arrest Walush in Poland? What is the recourse at this point in time?
Well, we should call on the government of Poland to return Walush to us, because Walush has broken his parole agreement. So legally, we're entitled to make a call in terms of international law that Wallace should be returned and he should be incarcerated in that same prison that he has so wrongly, illegally, and politically manipulatively been released. So we should make that call. But I do not hold my breath that this Ramaphosa regime will do so. But of course, that should not prevent us as the economic freedom fighters to make such an unequivocal call. But the principle stands. It was wrong for Wallace to have been released. He's broken his parole agreement, and he should get back into that very same prison cell that he had wrongly been released from. That would be the correct set of moves and the final outcome of this disaster.
MK argues that President Zuma, former President Zuma, does not deserve, or rather he does not have to explain himself as to why he went and visited Clive de Bluis while he was in prison. Could there be something that is put under the carpet here?
Of course. And I think under the circumstances, especially as the situation has developed now with the parole that was granted to Wallace and the comments that he made in his interview, as he's already in Poland, puts an obligation on President Zuma to take the nation into his confidence and to explain to us the actions that he had taken. These actions are not in a vacuum. They impact on how we understand the situation. They raise serious questions. And he has a responsibility, I would say even a patriotic responsibility towards the nation, to answer about some of the actions that he had taken. And surely he should not have a problem to do so if there's nothing to hide. If there's nothing to hide, why not? It would be a great act of openness. It would be a great assistance to our nation. It would help everyone to get further to the bottom of what has really happened. So we must stop saying, yes, one day I will talk, because that's the mantra of Jacob Zuma. One day I will talk. Let's stop that.
Yeah.
So I make a call on Jacob Zuma. Take the nation into your confidence. Act as a patriot. Tell us why you went to see Clive Derby Lewis. Tell us why you took the actions that you've taken. It's not good enough for you to come with a standard legal escape clause that you're under no obligation to tell us why you've done those very strange things, which raises all kinds of questions and suspicions. Surely, Jacob Zuma also wants to clean and clear himself of those suspicions.
Absolutely.
And the simple answer for him is to take us into his confidence and explain why he had done what he had done. And if there's nothing to hide, it should be the easiest thing in the world for him to do.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has been at the helm for almost 7 years now. He's going to deliver the State of the Nation address, which doesn't really inspire confidence, I can see already. But I just want us to reflect on the 7 years. Should we say, or should we be saying 7 wasted years? What has he really achieved in those 7 years? And were those achievements impactful to or on the lives of ordinary South Africans, and particularly on the Expropriation Act? What does that act really mean, and what is its implication on South African politics as well as geopolitics? I mean, so EFF has got its own policy, expropriation of land without compensation. But now we are told Expropriation Act has been put in place. Can you just perhaps take us back and explain the context of Expropriation Act, and also how different is it from the willing buyer, willing seller model?
Look, the Expropriation Act is vintage Ramaphosa. A lot of propaganda, a lot of hot air, very little effect. It is not what we in the economic freedom fighters mean when we speak about expropriation. What the Expropriation Act is doing, it basically leaves in the hands of white landowners, people who've stolen the land, the right to refuse that their land can be expropriated. Now, it's like me and you, I steal your car. Now you're using the car. I come to your house, I say, Titus, I want my car. You say, hey, Comrade Carl, sorry, I'm not allowing you to take your car back. You better pay. Otherwise, I may not even consider letting you have this car. I'm just reducing it to the basics. Ne? So, Ramaphosa always deals with issues of substance by reducing them to issues of propaganda. Remember how he dealt with the whole idea when he came into government. Tumamina, send me, the new dawn. I don't know who has been sent. I don't know to what effect anyone has been sent. I don't know what new dawn we're talking about. The ANC has now, under Ramaphosa, been under perpetual renewal for the whole period that he has been president of the ANC, and there has been no renewal. It has just been deterioration, rot, and losing of support from the voting public in South Africa. So that summarized the situation. The whole term of Ramaphosa has been a disaster. It's the worst part of any presidency since 1994. Someone raised to me yesterday the question, where is all the construction that Ramaphosa promised in the last SONA? Remember what he said? He said, we're going to turn South Africa into a construction site. I can still see him with those little hands doing it.
Yeah.
Where's the construction
And the smart
site?
cities, where are they?
Where's the smart cities? And the issue around restitution of land will be the same thing. All promises, no delivery. So I think that's what we need to expect from the upcoming SONA. But I don't think it is for me to comment, even in terms of a prediction on the SONA at this stage. We're just a day or so away from it. That should be left in the hands of our Commander-in-Chief and President to comment on the SONA. The only thing I can say is I'm not holding my breath, because if I do, I may just pass out.
You'll be disappointed.
I may just pass out because I won't get any oxygen.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the surprise that I saw on X a day ago of a message that was posted by Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. I do not want to get into detail, but I find it quite extraordinary that a scholar such as Dr. Ndlozi can claim now that he had been misled, and that Ramaphosa is apparently something much better than what he thought. I posted one line. I said, well, when politics leaves you,
Yeah.
it doesn't say goodbye.
Yeah.
And I saw that Commissar Senawu Tambo also had a price little short tweet. He said, Mbuyiseni, who told you? So, I don't know what Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi wants to achieve with that, but it raises questions. It doesn't provide answers. And what he said about Ramaphosa being much better than he allowed himself to be misled to think is utter poppycock.
Would you say it's unbecoming of an EFF member to praise and worship a president like Ramaphosa, who currently the EFF is taking him to court over Phala? The EFF is always lamenting him on Marikana. Would you then conclude and say it's unbecoming of a member of the EFF to conduct himself in that manner?
You see, Titus, it's all a question of discipline. When you know, and Dr. Ndlozi certainly knows, what the policy positions of the EFF are, you stick to those. And it is therefore unbecoming to post on social media a message that does not reflect those policy positions. And you've summarized them, I thought quite nicely. We're taking Ramaphosa to the Constitutional Court on Phala. We have condemned him for his failure to deliver. We've condemned him for the way in which he created a grand coalition with white supremacists, namely the DA and also the Freedom Front Plus. And I'm sure Dr. Ndlozi reads all our media statements. He's a member of the EFF. So he also knows that we have expressed our strong and very insightful reservations about this Land Expropriation Act, FUFI, game that Ramaphosa is playing. So when you know all of that, as a disciplined member of the EFF, you cannot tweet like that. And that makes his tweet totally unbecoming. But it seems that that has always been a little bit of his problem, the problem of discipline.
Yeah, because everyone who eventually leaves the EFF, although now we're not talking about a departure case, but everyone who departs the EFF always claims that they were misled.
Well, I couldn't help to be reminded of what that other big bailout leaver, betrayer, Floyd Shivambu said, "Oh, we were misled about Jacob Zuma. We were misled about who he is and what he stands for." Yeah. So, yes, you're right. These people use the phrase "we were misled" as an exit clause for themselves. But Titus, let's not continue talking about Dr. Ndlozi. I'm reluctant to just launch attacks. You know, there's an old saying, and I think that is exactly what is happening. Give the man enough rope, he will end up hanging himself.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there.
Yeah. The GNU, you look at their contribution towards the Democratic Alliance. You look at the contribution by the Democratic Alliance, Patriotic Alliance. These people seems to me to be singing for their supper. They always threaten to leave the GNU should Ramaphosa sign Bella Act, sign Expropriation Act. But it turns out they don't leave. They in fact defend or rather find diplomatic ways to justify their stay in the GNU. Your view on the Democratic Alliance, Helen Zille, in fact, staying in the GNU despite the ANC pushing forward with the likes of your Bella Act, your Expropriation Act?
Well, you see, the DA, regardless of what we say, that Ramaphosa is supposedly to be pushing ahead with some of these, what is interpreted by some commentators as progressive moves. The DA is having immense influence within the government of national unity. The CIC is correct to refer to this so-called government of national unity as led and determined by the DA. So the question is going to be how some of the contradictions that have always been there and were always going to raise their head within this grand coalition going to play out. Of course, the Bella bill was one of them. The expropriation bill is another, which I'm not exactly sure why the DA is even objecting, because they should see Ramaphosa as playing this smoke and mirrors game. But okay, let's wait and see how these contradictions continue to play out, because what I have said throughout is that I don't believe the so-called government of national unity will be able to survive. It's full of contradictions. It will eventually collapse under its own weight. And then the commander-in-chief is correct in the last press conference when he said, the ANC must know we're at the door. We are available to enter into a coalition government that is a progressive black coalition government. We in the economic freedom fighters have never been, in principle, against being part of a coalition. But our ideological clarity made it impossible for us to be part of a sellout coalition with white supremacist racists such as the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. So, I think the possibility exists for a progressive coalition to come about when the DA jumps out of the bus, so to speak. When and how that will happen, we will have to wait and see. But may I take you back to the positions that the economic freedom fighters has held about coalition throughout. After the 29th of May elections last year, our Secretary General released a letter, Commissar Marshal Dlamini, which encapsulated the principles that led the EFF in some of those discussions about coalition government. And those principles are still valid. We should revisit that letter because it gives us a clear insight about how it would be possible for us to become part of a progressive coalition, even with a former liberation movement, such as the African National Congress. So coalition is not ruled out for the EFF, and the Commander-in-Chief summarized it nicely by saying the ANC should know when the DA leaves, we're standing at the door. Helen Zille must know that there's no South African government that is going to collapse here.
Yeah.
And I think that is the situation.
Yeah.
And we don't need to speculate more than that because our clear ideological position is, I think, fully understood by everyone. And if Ramaphosa wants to understand it, and if he's prepared to go for a progressive coalition in the future, or whoever follows in his footsteps as president of the ANC, they will not find the economic freedom fighters wanting. That was the message the CIC delivered, and I think that is absolutely correct.
Yeah. And you took to X to express your excitement to be back into the portfolio committee of correctional services. What makes you excited about you being back on the portfolio committee? And having seen you on the portfolio committee on defense and military veterans, you have made some solid submissions there. What can we look forward to?
Well, I'm very grateful to the EFF for having granted me now also the possibility and opportunity to be an additional member to the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services. And you saw I was smiling when you asked the question because it comes with an interesting story. I was the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services in the first administration. And we had to deal with quite a lot of difficult and critical issues, among them the severe overcrowding in our prisons, the problem of privatization and outsourcing, which I've always been opposed to, and the whole issue of handing over prisons to private companies to manage and control them. I resisted it. I became a serious obstacle to it. And I was disappointed that my then political party, the African National Congress, was supporting the privatization of prisons. So I was out of sync with the ANC on that issue. And one day I got a phone call from the CEO of Bosasa, the well-known, notorious Gavin Watson. And he said he wanted lunch with me. So I went, I had lunch with Mr. Watson. I remember it was at Bukhara restaurant in Cape Town. I don't know if Bukhara is still existing even in Cape Town. And he said to me, Mr. Niehaus, leave your nonsense about opposing the privatization of prisons, and I will make you a very wealthy man. So he was obviously trying to bribe me. Now, I can be quite a fiery person. I am known when I get angry, I get proper angry. And I got very angry in that lunch. So I jumped up, I stood up, I slammed my chair down. I said, Gavin, go to hell. And I walked out of the restaurant. A couple of days later, I got a phone call from Ahmed Kafrada, who was then the parliamentary advisor to President Nelson Mandela. And he said to me, Carl, you're in trouble. I said, Uncle Kathy, why? I said, no, Gavin came to see Madiba, and he complains about you being an obstacle to this program of privatization of prisons. And you must understand that Bosasa gives a lot of money to the ANC, and we need that money to run the ANC. There are local government elections coming up. We can't afford to lose the money that they're giving us. So he even said to me, why don't you just make a U-turn and accept this issue of privatization? I said to him, Uncle Kathy, I told Gavin to go to hell, and I stand by that. So by implication, I basically also told him to go to hell.
Indirectly.
Yeah. A couple of days later, I got a phone call from the presidency. Niehaus. President Mandela wants you to come for breakfast at his official residence, Genadendal, tomorrow morning. I said yes, but in the back of my head, I said, here's trouble coming.
Yeah.
So the next day, I went for breakfast. He never raised the issue about the privatization problem and how I stand against it. He just told me while we were having breakfast, he used to call me my boy. My boy.
Were you still the spokesperson at the time?
No. Okay. Remember, I was spokesperson until April 1994, when I then became a member of parliament. The ANC works very differently from how we in the EFF works. Spokespeople are not members of parliament. They work full-time in the ANC office. So he just said to me, Carl, I've decided to send you to the Netherlands as ambassador. So he decided to kick me sideways out of the portfolio committee. I suppose he was nice to me because he could have just told me, I'm firing you. He was the president, a very powerful president on top of that. But at least he kicked me into a relatively good position as ambassador in the Netherlands. But I knew I was being removed because of my opposition to the privatization of prisons. And after I left that position as chair, a new chair came in, totally accepted privatization. Privatization with all its disasters continued. The ANC got the money from Bosasa that it was so keen after. And the consequence, the disastrous consequence of privatization played through up to this day. Because even the problem that there was with Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipa was because of the privatization of the Bloemfontein prison. So here's the moral of the story. The economic freedom fighters is now allowing me to go back to that committee 27 years later. And the EFF is very clear. My political party is very clear. We're against privatization. We're against outsourcing. We want to bring an end to tenders.
Build state capacity.
And we must build state capacity. And there's a lot of capacity in correctional services that can be utilized in-house, and also putting the inmates, the prisoners, to productive and effective work. All of that can be effectively done rather than outsourcing and tenders. So here is karma. 27 years later, I'm brought back. I'm given an opportunity to continue with a mission that I was unceremoniously removed from by President Mandela. I told this story in the Portfolio Committee of Correctional Services yesterday, the first meeting of the committee that I attended. And of course, the ANC members there were not happy. Oh, you can't say that about President Mandela, but unfortunately, yes, that is what he had done. So, the truth comes out. And in this instance, the truth has to be told. But for me, the more important
So are you saying President Mandela laid the foundation for corruption?
He played a role in it, definitely. He allowed some of these things to happen, and it became much worse in time after President Mandela's presidency, yes. But here is the story. Pieter Groenewald, who is now the Minister of Correctional Services, due to this unholy alliance that Ramaphosa has made also with the Freedom Front Plus, was a member of that portfolio committee in the first administration of which I was the chair. So yesterday when I spoke, he was in the meeting. And he said to me, that was 27 years ago. I said, yes, it is a lifetime ago.
Come on.
But I have not reminded him, but I will in due course, that he was one of those who supported the privatization of prisons as a member of that committee. Now he tries to be holier than thou because yesterday he said to me, no, I agree with you, we should get rid of privatization. Wow, the cloak blows with the wind as it suits the person who wears it. And in Groenewald's case, he is blowing with the wind because he likes his position and his salary as Minister of Correctional Services. But he's got something coming. We will fight, me together with Commissar Betty Diale, who is the standing member, the full-time permanent member of the EFF on that committee. I'm the additional member. We will fight privatization. We will fight the whole issue of tenders, and we will insist that there must be insourcing and that prisoners must be gainfully employed and work for their upkeep in prison. And I'm in the wonderful position that all of these are clear policy positions of the EFF. So that's the story about my return to the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services.
We're looking forward to the impact that you're going to make and ensure that the prisons of the Republic of South Africa are not privatized. They do away with neoliberal policies. So thank you very much.
And also that we don't play xenophobic games with prisoners, because there's a group within that committee, other parties, who wants to make a particular issue about people who are in South Africa but who are not South African citizens who have been in prison. The Act is clear. The Act doesn't talk about foreigners in prison and locals in prison. It deals with prisoners. So we will also deal with that issue in the understanding of what the policy positions of the economic freedom fighters are on those issues. And we will deal with it in terms of what the law determines, not what is determined by xenophobia and those who want to play us as Africans off against each other.
Absolutely. Comrade Carl, thank you very much. We always appreciate your presence here on the EFF podcast. We appreciate your wisdom. You always speak truth to power. So we hope the SANDF soldiers, troops that are deployed in the DRC will be brought back, because we are not going to allow their deployment without necessary resources.
Absolutely. They must come back. They cannot be used by big capital as pawns in their game of super exploitation. Let me thank you for the opportunity. I'm very privileged that you've given me 3 times the chance to come to this podcast. The last time I was here, there was a different photo on the wall. And you asked me for my opinion. And you remember I said, well, I think it may be a good idea to remove it.
Yes, we heeded the call.
And what a beautiful picture of our 10th anniversary rally at FNB Stadium do we have here now. That is what the EFF is all about. A mass-based, ideologically well-grounded, sound revolutionary movement. And now, as we spoke in this interview, in this podcast, let us move forward, let us rebuild, let us advance, and let us make sure that we do outstandingly well in the upcoming 2026
Absolutely.
local government elections.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Titus.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the people of South Africa, Africa, and the world for tuning in. We appreciate your support as well for always tuning into the EFF podcast. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you very much. My name is Titus Tsungur Kozaramsengo Tsoleka. Inka. Fight on.
Kirili fasilena kilabo kokomrayo rabaraba awuyegele murabaraba awuyegele rabaraba awuyegele Kirili utlalena kilamali mamulayo rabaraba awuyegele murabaraba awuyegele